Thank you very much, KPEDD, for inviting me, and the idea that I could show and explain what we've developed over the last years. I'm a Alaska born in Ketchikan to a fishing family, and I was an entrepreneur outside and had many different businesses. But I always came back for years to fish Kenai, and we commercially gillnetted Kenai out of Kenai Packers and Pacific Star eventually. But I said there has to be something we can do with the outfall, with the byproducts. There has to be a nutritional value in that product. So I set out to find out what the value of the product, the byproducts were as they came out the outfall, and we did some testing to find out that the nutritional value was quite a bit better than we thought, but almost as good as the filet that you eat if you take into consideration all of it, the skin and the head and the whole works. So we started out to find out, what do you do with it? We knew that you could make fish meal, and there was a lot of fish meal made, but there has to be, with a good nutritional value, there has to be a good dollar value. And we found out that there was people in the outside, in the pet treat industry, that were very interested in the product because they wanted a product that was food grade and did not come from China. Went to work over the years to find out, to solve it. Number one, we could solve the environmental issue, and that we could get 100% utilization of the resource, and that we could increase the state's value in their tax revenue, and then create a year-round employment. And we were going to do that in the employment by creating and maintaining of an inventory that would allow us to operate through the winter. The technology and the products that we developed took a long time to try different types of drying. We tried 7 different processes to dry that we could maintain the nutritional value, not disturb the oil structure, or the oil cell, and not contaminate the fiber. And I started out by, first of all, doing hydrolysate, and all that did was give us liquid fish, which then had to be dried, and it was not a very good productive way of doing it. So I started out by building a small 2-foot wide by 20-foot machine that used infrared. And my infrared process was to dry from the bottom through a mylar belt, and that would send out the moisture to the top without causing a crust to seal off any kind of moisture. And we arrived at a process that we knew we could save the west cell structure, hold the fiber, and maintain the nutritional value. And I did a test 10 years ago, and retested it just this last year, and found that there was very little degradation in the 2 samples. And that led us to, how are we going to produce and take care of all of this byproduct? And since then, I have developed a 2-foot wide by 40-foot machine that will give us the next step to building a bigger machine, which we figure will be an 8-foot wide machine. The infrared drying technology with a 2'40" machine is pictured here, and the unit itself is or I can break it in two in the middle and for shipping, and I want to bring it up and install it somewhere here in the state of Alaska and process what that machine will do to help us develop what we need for the bigger machine to do more and get into a cost-effective way of doing it. This is a machine is a mild steel machine that's been powder coated with food grade powder coat, and the end plates and the end panels are all stainless steel, and it has a 10 mil mylar belt that carries the product through the whole process. We use a special range of infrared to dry the material so that we can maintain the structure and the cell structure and the fiber and the nutritional value, but get the moisture down to around 5 to 7% so that we've got long shelf life. By reducing the moisture, the 83% moisture, we can have a product that's very light and is cost effective to ship. And so the food grade is the most important part about this whole thing, because our customers that we have want a food grade product, but it also has advantages for people that want to use it for third world countries to feed people, and to also use it as a supplement for pet treats. The pet food industry takes care of a lot of the waste from Alaska, but they're not so much interested in food grade and into human consumption that the pet treat people are. The unit itself will contain its own odor by using a air filtration system, and we also capture the moisture to make distilled water. The ingredients that we have are, when it comes off the belt, is an absolute very thin dried flake, which can in turn be milled to a powder. It has, and of course it's food grade, but it's very high in nutritional value, and that's the important to have the long shelf life, is also having good nutritional value. The moisture is retained, the moisture reduction, excuse me, is for lighter weight shipping. Easily milled to a powder, and it still maintains the essence. My test results are nutritional value, cell structure, maintain the fiber, and have a good shelf life. The market opportunities are pet treats. World Food Bank is interested in it. The MRE for the military are interested. Food grade applications and non-food applications. Now we know when we take fish in that there are going to be some products that are not going to be food grade when it comes to us. So we've had enough experience in making hydrolyzed fish that we feel that we can blend then with peat or some kind of soil and make a soil amendment with it, so that we can say that we can get 100% utilization of the resource. And I'll be available for questions later, and I want to thank you very much.
My name is Jeff Hetrick. I am the director of the Lipton Pride Marine Institute in Seward. I'm also a KPEDD board member, and my wife Rose and I own the Intern Lake by the Y at mile 36, Seward Highway. So the tourism presentation, a lot of these things apply to me in multiple ways. Lipton Pride Shellfish Hatchery is down on the waterfront in Seward. It's kind of part of the Marine campus down there with the Sea Life Center and the university. We do a lot of collaborative work with those folks. They're good neighbors, and it kind of makes a nice little interchange with people with different disciplines, but it all is tied into the oceans and the value of those. The Alluta Pride Reinstitute is operated by Chugach Regional Resources Commission. So this morning I'm going to tell you about kind of what we do as an organization. I'm going to give you a couple of quick slides of the status of the mariculture industry in Alaska, and then probably the most important thing is some funding that's coming our way through the EDAs and the EDDs and the mariculture cluster that is particular interest to the business community. So the Chugach Regional Resources Commission is a tribal consortium. We have 7 tribes that we work with in the Chugach region. In the Prince William Sound, we have the Valdez Native Tribe, we have Tutitlik, Eyak folks out of Cordola and Chinita. In Seward, we have the Katuchek folks. And then in Lower Cook Inlet, we have Nanwalek and Port Graham. But we also do a lot of work with the Soldoga Native Tribe. They've been a good partner of ours. They have their own natural resource program, but they're in the same region. We do a lot of work with them. Some of the things that we do that Chugach Regional Resources Commission is kind of abbreviated as called CIRC. And although the Alluta Pride Institute is part of CIRC, CIRC has a lot of other missions that they do. We do, I'm not sure these slides have that. This is the places I just described. Our organization does things like the Migratory Bird Commission, marine mammals, we have food security, we have a lot of interchange with tribal relations and working with the different agencies. We work with the Federal Subsistence Board, Fish and Game, both the Game and Fisheries Board processes, representing our folks and getting proposals in front of them. So it's a large, broad range of things that Chugach Regional Resources does, and Alluta Pride Marine Institute is just one small part of a much larger program. Here's our Marine Institute. It was originally this shellfish hatchery. It was built by Exxon Valdez oil spill money. Back after the oil spill, there was $100 million. $50 million went to the state and $50 million went to the feds. Of the $50 million that went to the state of Alaska, they decided to build the shellfish hatchery, as it was called then, in Seward. I needed to be in the oil spill region. And it's kind of what I tell people at the time was a necessary evil. The transport regulations and the production of shellfish in Alaska has to stay within state borders. And the only exception of that is oysters. I'll tell you about that briefly. And so there was this hope of developing a mariculture industry, which has been slow to develop, and we can talk about that. And part of the research institute was to have a mariculture center in the back that would look at new species and do research in conjunction with, say, the university or NOAA fisheries and that sort of stuff. It's a wonderful facility. The state did a great job in building it, but they had no interest in running it. And so went out to competitive bid, and Chugach Regional Resources Commission sponsored the local tribe at the time, Katuchek, to be the operator. Through time, it didn't work out for Katuchek, and Chugach Regional Resources Commission has been the main operator since. So we're right next to the waterfall, the famous Low Point waterfall, which is now going to be redirected and all that. But so for a landmark, if you want directions, just make a right at the end of the Seward Highway and stop before you get to the waterfall, and you're at the Marine Institute. But some of the things that we do there is far exceeds just shellfish production. But for mariculture, we do kelp. We do a lot of native shellfish in our region. And non-native shellfish would be things like, in our region, would be outside. We do a lot of work with South Central Alaska. We do red and blue king crab, sea cucumbers, oysters. The list goes on. We do purple hinge rock scallops, razor clams. We just spawned abalone a few weeks ago. We actually just spawned some Badarki clams, Badarki chitons, not too long ago. That's going to seem like that. Most recently, we started what's called the Chrome Lab, which is Chugach Region Ocean Monitoring. All of our communities, we've been doing ocean acidification research now for about a decade. And we have our members of our communities go out and take samples for us. We worked just yesterday with the Kachemak Bay Natural Estuarine Research Reserve. We worked at the Prince William Sound Science Center. We do ocean acidification samples as far as the Yogvik, Nome, King Cove, all the way down to Lucian Chain, St. Paul. We have this capacity in Seward to do real high level, what they call climate chemistry for ocean acidification. And based on that success and the success that we have with our tribal partners who do sampling for us, we just recently expanded, and now we do phytoplankton monitoring, nutrients, and most importantly, harmful algae bloom. So with changing climate, changing temperature, and a lot of other factors, the potential to have parallel shellfish poisoning outbreak has been increasing. So it's sort of be ironic that we produce shellfish for our people to harvest and eat when the possibility of toxicity exists. I don't want to scare people. We have a lot of monitoring that goes on. It's just something that seems to be happening more and more often. And the pattern and the occurrence is very irregular. So we're trying to get to the bottom of what causes these toxic algae blooms and be able to tell people in a safe manner without, alarming everybody that, the potential is there. Be careful with the shellfish that you consume. Yeah, some of the other projects that we've done, we worked at Alaska Pacific University. We worked with halibut, looking at starvation and trying to figure out why some of the male halibut aren't getting past the threshold for harvest. We've done starvation feed for that. We've done some toxicology work for the Alaska Pacific University. We've done similar things with octopus, trying to figure out what octopus eat. So we'll feed them different foods for multiple months and look at the tissues and see how it bioaccumulates. We've done some really cool salmon ocean acidification studies, finding out how ocean acidification might affect the olfactory response for salmon and their homing instinct in conjunction with food. Some other projects we do. Well, we do a lot of different stuff. It's kind of a fun place to work. You never know what's going to happen that next day. So anyway, it's more than just a shellfish hatchery. We do a lot of marine research, and it needs to tie back into our local communities, our native communities that we serve, but we're, in a broader sense, we're part of the Kenai Peninsula and all these coastal communities. This is just a quick shot of what the inside of the hatchery looks like. I've been director now for 20 years, and I'm not real good at the outreach sort of component, but I've been tasked and challenged to do better. This is one of our 4 modules. This is one of the 3 production modules we have, and we have a module for research. So it gives you a sense of the hatchery. It's 10,000 square foot. Like I said, the Fish and Game did a great job building the facility, but we've also done a very good job of maintaining it. And of course, when you're in the marine environment like that, everything rusts, including old guys like me, so you got to maintain them. This is just one of the modules. So now let's shift gears and talk to you about the shellfish mariculture industry. I'm not sure if you can see that slide. It's not real good, but it's from Sea Grant. And I'll just tell you quickly, we have seaweed right now where it's about 500,000 pounds sold in 2022 worth about $300,000. Okay, so it's just growing. You're probably going to hear a lot about kelp aquaculture. I can talk with you maybe a little bit this morning if I don't run out of time, or I can talk to you later on about it. Oysters has been around for quite a while. The commercial value is $2.6 million. Interesting enough, although there's a lot of farms in southeast Alaska, I think the number I heard most recently is about 60 or 70% of the oysters are coming from this region, which is basically Kachemak Bay. So it's a quiet, developing industry, provides jobs, and looking to expand. The mussels that are produced in Alaska all come from this region as well. There's very little clam harvest, clam aquaculture. So that's kind of what the state is right now. There's really just oysters and clams. I failed to mention that one of the biggest things that we do at Lutic Pride is that we do shellfish enhancement research. We plant clams in Seldovia, Port Graham. We do it in the Nanwalek. We've done a lot of Titlik. We've done razor clams outside of Cordova. We do butter clams, soft shell clams. And we're trying to close a life history. We're sending rockets to Mars, but we know very little about just the basic life histories of some of the things that are important to us both commercially, or at least used to be commercially in Kachemak Bay, but also as a recreational and a subsistence food. By having these things in captivity, we can look at how they behave as larvae, we can look at how their reproductive cycle goes. But more importantly, when we plant them out in these sites, we can get mortality and growth, find out what their time of spawning is. These things that would probably seem pretty obvious that you think we know, we really don't know much about them. And our hard-shell clam populations in South Central, specifically and statewide, have been declining for years, and people want to know why. And the menu is long. It can be decadal shifts in temperature, it can be ocean acidification, it can be overharvest, it can be predation. It's probably a combination of all those factors. We can use shellfish enhancement to bring back some of these populations, and we do a lot of work with that. And probably one of the most satisfying things in my job is when I see someone from these communities go out and harvest the shellfish that we planted to provide something that wasn't there before. Is very rewarding. So, mariculture, it's always been this potential. It's, I'd say, warm and fuzzy, right? We have these jobs that are coastal community, relies on the ocean. It's non-impactful. The people who care the most about water quality are people who, fishermen and mariculturists, right? So you worry about pollution and impacts that would affect a coastal community or the coastal region. The people that care most about that are the mariculture people who rely on those waters and the fishermen who fish those waters. So we've been trying to get the mariculture industry to develop in Alaska, and again, it's been slow. And so Alaska Fisheries Development Foundation, Alaska Shellfish Growers, Chugach Regional Resources, all the people have been trying to figure out a way to get this industry to grow. And then we formed what's called the Alaska Mariculture Task Force. It was formed under Governor Parnell, and then has continued on through the Walker administration, really kind of carried the water on it, and then Governor Dunleavy supported that again. And the goal is to make a $100 million industry in 20 years. And that's going from $2.5 million now, it's $2 million a couple of years ago, to $100 million. And to develop a roadmap, how to get there, what the needs, what the impediments are. And you can guess what they are, right? It's undercapitalization, right? Capital for people to expand. In some regards, regulatory, but I'm not a big advocate of that. I think the regulations in Alaska are just fine. Workforce development, which really comes down to being able to pay people to work on your farms. So right now, it's been kind of a mom and pop type of industry. And it's been successful. It's provided jobs, it's provided ways of life, good living, coastal communities, but how do we make it grow? And so we spent 3 years on this task force putting together this plan, and then lo and behold, just by being organized, by having this plan in place, an opportunity presented itself, which is what I'm going to talk about the remainder of my time this morning. One of the artifacts of the COVID epidemic and the funding from the federal government was an opportunity through the EDA to apply for regional projects or statewide projects to promote an industry. And it was led by Southeast Conference, KPEDD, Prince William Sound Economic Development, and the Southeast Economic Development. They formed what is called a cluster. And then the other entities got involved with it, and they're all listed there, who really, I was just telling someone, it was last February when this opportunity came up. And it was really 24/7 to try to get this grant application together, to make a cohesive application that encompassed the whole state. You know, we've all seen how Alaska's overlaid with the United States, how huge that is, right? And I think, Cassie was involved in that. I think there was 26 that were finally awarded, or some number like that around the country. But Alaska was awarded $49 million to develop the mariculture industry. And the announcement came, I think, in October, November. Prior to that, the amount of time and effort put into trying to come up with a plan, to come up with budgets, to come up with who's going to be doing what and how, and it came together. I think many of us were very surprised when that announcement came out that the funding was awarded. And now the work has begun. So next week is one of the kickoff meetings, but we've had all kinds of other meetings about how this money is going to be spent, who's going to be doing what. It's a short time frame. It's going to take a lot of energy, which has already come from KPEDD and our organization. Yesterday I was meeting with the Kachemak Shellfish Mariculture Group about how we're going to make sure that their needs are met, because there's capital funds, there's funds for projects, and so it's a big deal. And so maybe we're going to have what's needed to make this $100 million industry, go from what it is now to $100 million by year 2030, whatever it's going to be. So that's a big announcement. $49 million to boost mariculture industry in Alaska through the American Rescue Plan. And here it is. There were 60 finalists out of 529 applicants. 21 projects, and we were one of the 21s that were awarded. So it was very competitive. Kudos to KPEDD and everyone else. So here's how it breaks down. I have a few minutes, right? So one of the things I mentioned earlier was revolving loan fund. So the state's always had a revolving loan fund, but one of the issues is it's very similar to going to a commercial bank. They have a commercial bank as the backup, and you'd have to put up collateral. And quite honestly, very few people want to mortgage their house to go raise oysters. And so the amount of capital that was available for Alaska has been minimal. Part of the reason that larger firms haven't come to Alaska is, and I'm thinking of people in the Pacific Northwest specifically, is that they've left the state of Washington or California and Oregon, and they've migrated to British Columbia because of proximity. They don't have the transportation, the workforce, the logistical issues. Eventually they're going to come here for a lot of reasons. And in my opinion, one of the reasons is because the state is welcoming for that, and that our permit regulations are, I think, appealing for that. So I think someday you're going to see some of the bigger operators, and you're seeing that kind of movement with the kelp. So there's $10 million that's available for revolving loan funds. I know people are anxious to get at it. They want to expand their oyster and kelp operations and look at alternative species. The governance and coordination is kind of a government type. That's where KPEDD comes in. That's funding for them to help us. Or they don't, KPEDD's not asking for funding, which is kind of nice. They're just redirecting it and making sure that these projects go the way they're supposed to go. We're actively recruiting a mariculture person just to help us being CERT and APMI, to be able to deal with this whole program, because it's a federal grant. It's not just take the money and run. There's going to be a lot of reporting and requirements. Workforce development is going to be led by the university system, trying to not just get people to work on farms, but the processing industry for value added for oysters and shellfish. And of course, as we just heard about, who's going to operate an infrared kelp dryer if we get that far with something like that. So there's a real need to have a skill set that's going to promote mariculture. Research and development is something obviously I'm very interested in. New species, expand our list beyond just oysters and kelp. So yesterday we're finalizing plans to look at cockles. We've raised cockles before at Tippett very successfully, and maybe add that to the product mix. The marketing needs is mostly geared towards value added for oysters, perhaps freezing and tapping into the cruise ship industry, and of course marketing kelp, which is right now I can tell you we can grow a lot of kelp in the Shellfish Institute. We did 12 miles this year. We're ready to do 30 or so next year. We've proven we can grow it out in the farms, but the jury's still out exactly what we're going to do with all of it. So there's still things left to do. Green energy is kind of neat. That's going to be led by a Southeast Conference that's looking at these remote areas getting by the energy problems. That's one of the biggest issues when you're working in Cake or you're working in Craig or something like that, and you're paying 40 cents a kilowatt. It's just prohibitive. So what else can we do? Is it solar, wind, tidal? What can we do for the energy? And we're also looking at actually using battery-operated boats and vessels instead of just traditional diesel gas, which is kind of interesting. And then equipment technology is also really important. It's probably the most thing that's going to help, or it's going to affect the KPEDD and the Kenai Peninsula, is that we'll be able to purchase infrared processing equipment if we go that way, or blanchers, or freezers for processing kelp, or vacuum packers and freezers for value added for oysters. And this is all trying to be sorted out. The amount of money is incredible. One of the prohibitions is it needs to go through a private nonprofit. So our organization is looking at how can we kind of mitigate that issue and get money into the private hands as we own the equipment and trying to sort all that out. It hasn't been sorted out statewide, it hasn't been sorted out in our region for sure, but that's a fair amount of money. Our organization is looking at things like bioreactors for producing algae. There's other things. We're talking about building a new nursery system, actually 2 nursery systems for the Kachemak Bay folks and one for ourselves in Seward. So this is all going to happen probably in the next year or so. It's a lot of money and the time frame is compressed, so there's a lot of work to be done. So anyway, this is all the different things. I didn't realize that we weren't going to take questions this morning, so I'll probably end with that. What I have is a series of slides that talk about those 9 buckets of different funding and the details. And I'm happy to talk about them later on. So anyway, thank you for your time. It's wonderful being over. Nice to see everybody. Thank you.